Good day, everyone. Group 7 is here for another interesting topic about the loss of biodiversity. In today's report, we will share the facts and information about the loss of biodiversity, the recent studies and issues, the human factors that cause it, and ways to solve this concern.
Biodiversity is a term that represents the total variety of all life on Earth. That's a big thing to sum up. Thousands of different wild habitats, millions of different species, billions of different individuals, and the trillions of different characteristics they all have. The total biodiversity of our planet is immense. Which is a good thing, because the more biodiversity, the more secure all life on Earth is, including ourselves. Only when life is at its most varied, vigorous, biodiverse, can we hope to thrive. We may not know it, but we need towering forests across 1/3 of the land surface to lock away carbon and keep the climate stable. We need millions of pollinators and billions of soil organisms and megatons of plankton to keep the food we eat in supply. We need strange plants deep in jungles to create our medicines, and coral reefs and mangrove swamps to protect the coasts we depend upon. Our planet's biodiversity provides all the things we need for free. But it will only do so if there's lots of it, and at the moment it's under attack. In the last 50 years, our activities have dramatically reduced biodiversity across the globe. We've snuffed out habitats, reduced populations of wild animals by 60%, and even driven whole species extinct. The number of lions in Africa has dropped by 65%. The number of individual flying insects in Europe has dropped by 75%. The number of bluefin tuna in the Pacific has dropped by 95%. Biodiversity is dropping everywhere and fast. This is catastrophic for nature and therefore ourselves. We talk about climate change a lot, but biodiversity loss is as important an issue. How do we stop this loss of life? How do we ensure that biodiversity, our planet's vital statistic, begins to increase again? In fact, we already know exactly what to do.
Now, let us know what biodiversity is. Biodiversity comes from two words, bio and diversity, which means life and variety. In simple terms, it means the variety of life on Earth. According to the National Geographic Society, it refers to the variety of living species on Earth, including plants, animals, bacteria, and fungi. Biodiversity is also synonymous with nature. According to the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity, it is the variability among living organisms. This includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. It's all the plants and animals that interact with each other and the physical world around them in areas called ecosystems. Now, let's move forward to the three types of biodiversity. We have genetic, species, and ecosystems. Let's dig deeper into each type. You might be wondering what composes genetic diversity. If you are thinking of genes, DNA, or genotypes, you are definitely right. Genetic diversity is a variety of genes and traits available within species. On a genetic level, biodiversity is what makes you different from everyone you know. Each individual has a unique mixture of genes. Moving forward to the next type, which is the species diversity. You must be thinking about animals and plants. Well, you are correct. Species diversity is a variety of species within an ecosystem. On a species level, it's all the different plants and animals that exist, from gorillas, dogs, whales, mushrooms, and many more. Last but not the least is the ecosystem diversity. Are you thinking about land and water habitats? You guessed it right. Ecosystem biodiversity is the variety of ecosystem and habitat types in an area of land and water. Ecosystems are areas of biodiversity where plants and animals interact with the environment in different ways. Take, for example, a coral reef ecosystem. There, you may find a variety of corals, fish, rays, turtles, jellyfish, urchins, seaweeds, phytoplankton, and algae, all interacting within the ecosystem. Biodiversity comes together in ecosystems. It might be easy for us to list some examples of animals and plants on a species level. However, describing the intricacies of ecosystems and their functions can be complex. That's because over time, ecosystems and their processes have developed a way of being stable or balanced. Each ecosystem requires a variety of plants and animals and sufficient habitat space to function accordingly. Numerous ecosystems now have been disrupted and are at risk. It can have harmful effects primarily because of the many advantages we obtain from ecosystems. Shifts to one part of an ecosystem can also result in changes in different aspects, but the consequences of these disruptions can be tough to anticipate. Sometimes ecosystems can adjust to these changes, especially if they are biodiverse, but specific changes can spark ecosystem disruption. We have here a picture of the benefits of the biodiversity and the services of the ecosystems. We have habitat, erosion control, climate regulation, medicines, fresh water, pest and disease management, protection from storms, pollination, mental and physical health, food, soil formation, and also building materials. But what if biodiversity is lost? Can we still enjoy these services? When we say biodiversity loss, it refers to the decline or disappearance of biological diversity. Today, biodiversity is being lost rapidly due to various threats. According to the World Wildlife Organization, there's been a 68% decrease in global populations of mammals, fish, birds, reptiles, and amphibians since 1970. Over 1 million plants and animals have been threatened with extinction. We must understand what's at risk when biodiversity and ecosystems are degraded or destroyed. But the question is, what can we do? To further know about biodiversity loss, I'll give the screen to Ms. Quevedo.
As we have learned earlier, biodiversity, or known as biological diversity, does not only revolve around the plants that we eat, see, and take care of in our homes, or the animals that we pet and consume, or the insects that we usually spot in and outside our homes. It refers to every single species and the richness of species, living or non-living, on Earth. Now, the loss of biodiversity is critically alarming. It can be viewed as the loss of species in our ecosystem. Biodiversity loss describes the diminishing of plants, animals, and other organisms in many places around the world. In addition, to avoid overlooking the other factor that threatens long-term ecosystem health, let us consider other issues that contribute to the loss of biodiversity. First is the decline in genetic diversity. When the population of a particular species decreases, its social structure becomes unbalanced, thus causing a detrimental effect on the ecosystem. It keeps the surviving males and females from finding mates, which further declines the population. The decline in genetic diversity, along with the depopulation, may decrease breeding, which continues the diminishing of the population. Second is the loss of niche. Another factor is when a species' function is reduced. Though they are not eliminated from the ecosystem, their role in our ecosystem diminishes as their number drops more. For example, clearing trees from a forest eliminates the shading, temperature and moisture regulation, animal inhabitant, and nutrient transport services they provide to the ecosystem. So, as their population reduces, so does their function in the ecosystem. Third is the seasonal changes. We are very well aware that human actions are crucially the cause of biodiversity loss. But with natural factor, biodiversity increases and decreases with natural cycles, which means that it depends on seasonal changes. For instance, the onset of spring will give way for feeding and breeding, increasing biodiversity as the populations of many species rise. Whereas during the onset of winter, the population decreases in areas biodiversity as warm adapted insects die and migrating animals leave. So the same thing happens to plants and invertebrate animals, such as insects. Hence, the seasonal rise determines an area's biodiversity. Moving on to the last but not the least is the natural ecological disturbances. Natural ecological disturbances such as wildfires, floods, and volcano eruptions change ecosystems excessively by eradicating local populations of some species and transforming whole biological systems. Before we move to the next presenter, here's a 2019 report from the United Nations entitled UN Report Nature's Dangerous Decline Unprecedented, Species Extinction Rates Accelerating. The report revealed that around 1 million animals and plant species are now threatened with extinction, many within decades, more than ever before in human history. The diverse species are declining fast. The average abundance of native species in most major land-based habitats has fallen by at least 20%, mostly since 1900s. More than 40% of amphibian species, almost 33% of reef-forming corals, and more than a third of all marine mammals are threatened. For the insects, although their picture is not clear, the available evidence supports a tentative estimate of 10% being threatened. At least 680 vertebrate species had been driven to extinction since 16th century, and more than 9% of all domesticated breeds of mammals used for food and agriculture had become extinct by 2016, with at least 1,000 more breeds still threatened.
Aside from what Jerry has mentioned, there are other issues that contribute to the loss of biodiversity. First, we have habitat loss. When an ecosystem is significantly altered by agriculture and industrial, oil and gas drilling, residential development, or irrigation, the ecosystem would no longer be able to provide animals with the food, water, and places to raise their young that requires for their survival. Every day, there are fewer and fewer places for these species to call home. It is caused by three major kinds of habitat loss. We have habitat destruction, habitat fragmentation, and habitat degradation. The first major kind of habitat loss is habitat destruction. It is when people directly destroy the habitat, such as by cutting down trees, mowing lands, filling wetlands, dredging rivers, and many more. While the second one is habitat fragmentation. It is when certain habitats became smaller and smaller or divided into pieces because humans are occupying their spot or building something. For example, a river was divided into a dam or was blocked for road development. The aquatic animals that live in that river have a little place to go around to hunt for food or mate because they are separated from both sides of the river. Another scenario is that those migratory animals would have a hard time finding a place to stop by for a while because the whole city was urbanized. They don't know where they can hunt for foods or place to rest. Third is habitat degradation. From the word degradation or great decline of something, and in relation to biodiversity, this is when habitats became deteriorated to the point that they can no longer support and sustain wildlife. Some factors that can cause or start habitat degradation are pollution, the increase of invasive species, and the consistent disruption of the flow of the ecosystem. According to the study of Jackson and Farig in 2013 entitled Habitat Loss and Fragmentation, habitat loss is happening at a rapid rate, that agriculture and human land use are the major contributor to habitat loss. And according to Balmford et al. In 2002, there is a huge habitat loss in forests. The Earth's forests had an excessive decrease of 5.2 million hectares per year between 2000 and 2010. It is mostly in woodlands. Habitat loss has important and constant massive effects on biodiversity because of the direct and indirect negative impact on the species abundance, richness, distribution, and its genetic diversity. In particular, habitat loss is directly proportional to the decrease in population and growth rate. According to Donovan et al. In 2002, they showed that the decline of wildlife in urbanized places is the same in regions with a huge amount of habitat loss. Habitat loss is one of the many reasons that scale down the number of specialist species, disrupt species interactions, reduce trophic chain length, diminish dispersal ability and breeding success, and alter predation rate and components of animal behavior related to success rates in foraging, according to Farig in 2003. The next contributor to the loss of biodiversity are invasive species. It is any non-native species that significantly modifies or disrupts the ecosystem in which it colonizes the native species. This might be any kind of living organism, amphibian, plant, insect, fish, fungus, bacteria, or organisms of eggs or seeds that can be considered as invasive species. Invasive species are introduced or spread to other areas mostly through human activities such as intentional or accidental releases of aquaculture species, tourism, transport, or climate crisis that lead to migration and other means. And it doesn't necessarily mean that invasive species came from another country. Some are just species going to an area that is not their habitat and competing with other species for food or forcefully occupying the habitat itself. Species that have the potential to harm the environment, grow and reproduce and spread rapidly are classified as invasive. Invasive species impact native ecosystems through habitat modification, competing with native species for resources, predation of native species, herbivory on native plants, bringing in pathogens, and hybridizing with native species, leading to loss of genetic diversity. Human health, economy, commercial, agricultural, and natural biodiversity are put at risk because of these invasive species. Invasive species can cause ecosystem disturbance since they are strong contenders than native species. They may consume food resources more instantly or efficiently, or start taking over natural habitats faster than native species can adjust to the new changes. Several other invasive species encroach on native species, and if the natives have little or no natural defenses against the aggressors, they may be destroyed and reduced easily. So trivia, approximately 42% of threatened or endangered species are at risk due to the invasive species. According to the World Conservation Union, invasive alien species, or in short IAS, are the second most significant threat to the loss of biodiversity in the whole world, just after habitat loss. In their new ecosystems, these IAS act as a menace by becoming the predators, competitors, parasites, hybridizers, and diseases of the native species as well as the domesticated plants and animals. On the other hand, according to the Convention on Biological Biodiversity, about 10,000 alien species are registered in Europe, some of which have a purpose and are still economically important, but some of them really inflicted huge damage to the natural ecosystem. These alien species can be categorized as invasive.
Massive vines that blanket the southern United States, climbing as high as 100 feet as they uproot trees and swallow buildings. A ravenous snake that is capable of devouring an alligator. Rabbit populations that eat themselves into starvation. These aren't horror movie concepts, they're real stories. But how could such situations exist in nature? All three are examples of invasive species. Organisms harmful not because of what they are, but where they happen to be. The kudzu vine, for example, had grown quietly in its native East Asia, eaten by various insects and dying off during the cold winters. But its fortunes changed when it was imported into the southeastern United States for porch decoration and cattle feed. Its planting was even subsidized by the government to fight soil erosion. With sunny fields, a mild climate, and no natural predators in its new home, the vine grew uncontrollably until it became known as the plant that ate the South. Meanwhile, in Florida's Everglades, Burmese pythons, thought to have been released by pet owners, are the cause of decreasing populations of organisms. They're successfully outcompeting top predators, such as the alligator and panther, causing a significant reduction in their food sources. They're not a problem in their native Asia because diseases, parasites, and predators help to control their population size. And in Australia, European rabbits eat so many plants that they wipe out the food supply for themselves and other herbivores. They're a pretty recent addition, intentionally introduced to the continent because one man enjoyed hunting them. Like the Burmese pythons, various factors in their native habitat keep their numbers in control. But in Australia, the lack of predators and a climate perfect for year-long reproduction allows their populations to skyrocket. So why does this keep happening? Most of the world's ecosystems are the result of millennia of co-evolution by organisms, adapting to their environment and each other until a stable balance is reached. Healthy ecosystems maintain this balance via limiting factors, environmental conditions that restrict the size or range of a species. These include things like natural geography and climate, food availability, and the presence or absence of predators. For example, plant growth depends on levels of sunlight and soil nutrients. The amount of edible plants affects the population of herbivores, which in turn impacts the carnivores that feed on them. And a healthy predator population keeps the herbivores from becoming too numerous and devouring all the plants. But even minor changes in one factor can upset this balance, and the sudden introduction of non-native organisms can be a pretty major change. A species that is evolved in a separate habitat will be susceptible to different limiting factors, different predators, different energy sources, and different climates. If the new habitat's limiting factors fail to restrict the species' growth, it will continue to multiply, outcompeting native organisms for resources and disrupting the entire ecosystem. Species are sometimes introduced into new habitats through natural factors like storms, ocean currents, or climate shifts. The majority of invasive species, though, are introduced by humans. Often this happens unintentionally, as when the zebra mussel was accidentally brought to Lake Erie by cargo ships. But as people migrate around the world, we have also deliberately brought our plants and animals along, rarely considering the consequences. But now that we're learning more about the effects of invasive species on ecosystems, many governments closely monitor the transport of plants and animals and ban the imports of certain organisms. But could the species with the most drastic environmental impact be a group of primates who emerged from Africa to cover most of the world? Are we an invasive species?
The last contributor to the loss of biodiversity is overexploitation. It is the discipline of procuring an excessive amount of either aquatic or terrestrial animals, which deteriorates the stocks or numbers of certain species while driving everyone else to extinction. There are types of overexploitation, which are overhunting, overfishing, and poaching. And trivia, the third world's endangered vertebrates are threatened by overexploitation. First type of overexploitation is overhunting. It is the excessive hunting of animals. One example is the overhunting of passenger pigeons and great auks, which are hunted for their eggs and feathers until they were driven into extinction. The second example is the almost extinction of American bison for their skin in the 19th century. One reason for overhunting, aside from food consumption, is the demand for the specific body parts of the animals, such as their skin, tusks, bones, and many more. The second type of overexploitation is overfishing. It is the great demand for aquatic animals for food consumption. In other cases, big companies and commercial fisheries overfish to some extent that even the small fishes are not spared. We humans have been harvesting fish faster than they can reproduce and populate in the ocean. The third type of overexploitation is poaching. It is the illegal hunting and trading of protected animals to become part of some rare collection of pets and souvenirs, or put as a trophy or displays in the home. Overexploitation doesn't necessarily mean only animals are being exploited. It could be the exploitation of water, lands, plants, trees, and crops, such as when people cut an excessive number of trees without planting new batches and waiting for them to replenish. Another is the gathering of rare plants and harvesting crops without waiting for them to grow mature just because of the need to meet the demands of the people or for their own personal use. According to the study of GU entitled Cross-Border Resource Management, overexploitation, or specifically overharvesting, can be the main cause of the extermination of the resource that is being exploited, but it doesn't apply to all resources, except the following, which are the wild plants, grazing pastures, game animals, fish stocks, forests, and the aquifers in specific or especially in dry places. The issue of overexploitation itself is not new, but it has become a pressing concern in the present time. In the study entitled World Seas and Environmental Evaluation by Harding Simon in 2019, he stated that overexploitation became a huge threat to the small-scale fisheries in Madagascar. The issue of overexploitation or overfishing in certain coastal areas such as Toliara, Morombe, and Morandava is very alarming in Madagascar. There has been a great reduction in coral reef fisheries on the Grand Recife de Toliara, and the maximum catch by batch has lessened. Then the usage of different types of fishing gears such as seine nets to catch small fish just shows that the coastal area was exploited for overfishing. And these are the issues or factors regarding the loss of biodiversity. Now let us know the human factors that causes biodiversity loss.
Before digging deeper into the human factors that cause biodiversity loss, let's first examine the human population growth through history. So historical demographers estimate that around the year 1800s, the world population was only around 1 billion people. But this number increases almost sevenfold, and in the year 2022, around 8 billion people were recorded. This fact is somehow linked to the problem of loss of biodiversity, since a growing population means increased food production as well. So the natural ability of the environment to support the number of population become hard, thus humans seek answers, make actions, and by doing so there is no way that the environment can't be affected. So humans do find ways to support human population. However, the proceeding performance and practice, such as reshaping the natural habitats to make way for agriculture, manufacturing, etc., in parts create that result in drop of biodiversity. So presenting here are the 5 human-mediated causes to the loss of biodiversity. Let's start with the land use stage. So this refers to the destruction, fragmentation, or conversion of the piece of land or habitat to be used by humans. In other words, it is any way in which humans modify the natural landscape. Such example is tropical forest to a palm oil plantation, as shown in this picture. So see how the once tropical forest has been cleared for oil palm, or how it was changed as space for agriculture. So by doing so, the life or the species that was in there are affected, hence becoming them extinct. Another example is when forests are fragmented by the human development. So aside that many animals were killed from crossing the unfamiliar terrain, animals also becomes isolated, and thus result in loss of genetic diversity. So the population of animals, organisms, plants, and such will struggle to adapt to a changing environment, and so thus their population becomes unstable, resulting in their number to decline. Deforestation was also among those that humans have done that threatens biodiversity. So it happens because humans cut down trees for things like building houses or perhaps because of urbanization, which in turn has a major negative impact to the environment and the species that live in there. So destruction, fragmentation, or degradation of an existing natural habitat reduces and eliminates the food resources and living space for most species. Often, species that cannot migrate are wiped out. The second cause is resource exploitation. As said by Ms. Seniedo, this is the process of harvesting too many aquatic or terrestrial animals which depletes the stocks of some species while driving others to extinction. So this includes things like overfishing, overhunting, or over-harvesting for things like food, medicine, and timber. So due to the rapid population growth, resources have been exploited in an effort to supply the rising demand for food. So among the most commonly overexploited species are marine fish and invertebrates, trees, and animals hunted for meat. As a result, the resources itself will become exhausted, leading to extinction as organisms who were excessively captured without leaving enough time to reproduce. The third cause is pollution, which describes as the addition of harmful substances or nutrients to an ecosystem. So pollution causes biodiversity loss by creating health problems in exposed organisms and even kills species in some cases. So human activity influences the natural environment, producing negative, direct or indirect effects that affects the environment, physical makeup, and biodiversity. So see for example the hazardous wastes and chemicals from human activities that go through the water stream affecting the organisms that happen to be in those places. Another cause is the introduction of alien species. So invasive species, as previously said, are the non-native species that significantly modify or disrupt the ecosystem they colonize. So they are able to cause ecosystem disruption by outcompeting native species for food and habitat, leading to native species population decreases. And this happens, one reason is through human introduction, such way of trade and travel. One example of this is the introduction of species of comb jelly in the Black Sea year 1992. So within months, this single introduction resulted in the total collapse of the anchovy fishery in the Black Sea. And for the fifth cause, we have climate change, which refers to the long-term shift in temperature and weather patterns, mainly caused by human activities, especially burning fossil fuels. Every species has its own optimal habitat and tolerance ranges, and that includes all the things that go along with living in the right temperature range. So the rise of heat makes it hard for most organisms to adapt to a temperature change, thus result in their unsurvival.
Biodiversity is the variety of life, as we saw in this video. there are thought to be 8.7 million species on planet Earth. And as we saw in this video, biodiversity is of utmost importance to humans. The loss of one key species can have a detrimental impact on many levels, from other species of animals to plants to the physical environment, as shown by wolves. Human activities are reducing biodiversity. Our future depends upon maintaining a good level of biodiversity, and so we need to start taking measures to try and stop the reduction. In this video, we're going to look at how humans are negatively impacting biodiversity. Here are some of the main human-induced threats facing biodiversity. As the world population has grown from 1.5 billion in 1900 to nearly 7.5 billion people today, unsurprisingly, the land use has changed. Habitats have been destroyed in favor of agriculture, forestry, fishing, urbanization, and manufacturing. Unsurprisingly, habitat loss has greatly reduced the species' richness. Habitat fragmentation has also meant that populations have been split into smaller subunits, which then, when faced by challenging circumstances, have not been able to adapt and survive. After habitat loss, overharvesting has had a huge effect on biodiversity. Humans historically exploit plant and animal species for short-term profit. If a resource is profitable, we develop more efficient methods of harvesting it, inevitably depleting the resource, as is currently happening with fishing and logging. The exploited species then needs protection. The difficulty is that the demand then outstrips the supply, and so the resource value rises. This increases the incentive to extract the resource and leads to the final collapse of the population, as happened with whales, elephants, spotted cats, cod, tuna, and many more species. Human activities are polluting the air and water. Toxic discharge into water from industrial processes, unsurprisingly, has a negative effect on local aquatic species by killing, weakening, or affecting their ability to reproduce. Another big water pollution problem is eutrophication, which we'll look at in detail in this video. Phosphorus and nitrogen in fertilizers run off agricultural fields and pass into rivers. These surplus nutrients cause algae to bloom, which then starves other aquatic species of oxygen and light, causing them to die. Acid rain is a consequence of humans polluting the air. This causes lakes and water bodies to become more acidic, killing fish, mollusks, amphibians, and many other species. A huge impact humans have had on planet Earth is the introduction of alien species to habitats. In fact, it is estimated that on any given day there are 3,000 species in transit aboard ocean-going vessels. Alien species can cause problems in a number of ways. Pause the video and have a look. Throughout the Earth's history, there have been periods of rapid climate change that have led to mass extinction events. We are currently in a period of fluctuating climate, but nearly all scientists agree that human activities like burning fossil fuels are speeding up global warming. We don't know how much climate change is going to affect biodiversity in the future, but it is predicted to be huge. Loss of sea ice and ocean acidification are already causing huge reductions in biodiversity. Climate change alters temperature and weather patterns, with changing patterns of rainfall and drought expected to have significant impacts on biodiversity. So there you have a selection of human-related impacts on biodiversity. There are many more, which with a quick search on the internet will bring up. If you want to understand why we should care about maintaining biodiversity, watch this video.
Thank you for that, Jenny. So, moving on to the ways of addressing the loss of biodiversity. So, the issues, as mentioned earlier, that contribute to the decline of biodiversity have pushed it atop at the agenda of the international stage, making it at the spotlight to be assessed and addressed the linkage of biodiversity, climate change, and desertification. Some ways of addressing the loss of biodiversity are biodiversity conservation. It is hugely necessary to conserve biodiversity. There are several ways of conserving biodiversity. Here are three. Number one, protecting habitats. This pertains to identifying animal habitats and the threats they face and eliminating these threats to maintain the natural area. This also pertains to avoiding disturbing wildlife, nesting and bedding areas, and wildlife habitats. You can promote habitat protection through setting up man made birdhouses or man made bathhouses. Second, or number two, is limiting and modifying agricultural activities. This is done by saving water in wetlands, lessening irrigation, and managing livestock grazing to maintain quality range conditions and leave areas ungrazed. Third is domestic conservation. This involves individually taking responsibility for any wildlife one has direct control over. These are maintaining your garden by managing weed growth. Another way of addressing biodiversity loss is restructuring business plans. A business have several elemental risks from an ecosystem failure. This concept needs to be considered along with the comprehension that there is a reputational risk of unsustainable supply chains. Some commodities like cocoa and coffee are necessary for an economy but depend on the delicate ecosystem. The growth of these commodities requires a stable ecosystem weaved into its needs. Hence, businesses requires to factor these considerations into their risk analysis and distribute the capital investment accordingly. Subsequently, businesses were said to have a fundamentally crucial role in sustainability transformation. Therefore, they must set standards and laws addressing biodiversity loss reduction. More ways on addressing biodiversity loss is through pressuring government. According to earth.org, governments should be convinced to draft, pass, and enforce legislations protecting biodiversity. Governments should create an environment that accommodates intergovernmental bodies and foreign lawmakers to work with an advocacy in regard to issue of biodiversity. An unsustainable food production can also be a factor in biodiversity loss. So governments should ensure business policies are set to encourage more sustainable ways by guaranteeing sustainable fishing methods through certifying seafood products to start with. Another way governments can spearhead in reduction of loss of biodiversity is through the protection of national parks and other areas with flora and fauna through laws, and they can provide incentives and subsidies to farmers to encourage production methods towards sustainable land stewardship. Human activities also have dire repercussions for the oceans. Sea life acquired these repercussions through pollution and climate change, and mostly on overfishing. Overfishing is when fishes are caught from the ocean at a faster rate than the population can replenish. Other sea creatures have been overfished. One of these is the oysters. Methods used in harvesting them now involve scraping the bottom of the ocean, resulting in all sorts of unintended fishes being caught and at the same time destroying the habitat. Green Wave, a charity that promotes restorative vertical ocean farming, was created to address this issue. Co-founder Brent Smith describes vertical ocean farming as an underwater garden where they grow kelp, mussels, scallops, and oysters by mimicking the habitats that would have previously existed in the ocean. These gardens diminish the trawling of the ocean floor and would in turn create more food for other sea creatures. Moreover, these gardens add benefits to the ecosystem. Seaweeds and shellfish require no fresh water, feed, or fertilizer, dramatically reducing the overall environmental impact on and decreasing costs. And lastly, one way to address biodiversity loss is through change. As Michael Jackson sang, "Start with the man in the mirror." Biodiversity loss comes from human direct actions. We should start making conscious decisions to create sustainable and biodiversity friendly choices that contribute to the solution of this issue. Skipping off plastic straws and avoiding the use of plastic bags by bringing your own bag are little efforts that would result in a collective impact that would be monumental for the world.
Biodiversity has been on the spotlight these past years as human activity has taken a toll on it. As we all know, each being, each organism is necessary for another to thrive. If one fails, another do so, resulting in a chain of loss of organisms. Without without a wide range of animals, plants, and microorganisms, we cannot have the healthy ecosystem that we rely on to provide us with the air we breathe and the food we eat. Making sure that loss of biodiversity is addressed will lead to a more sustainable future. This is Group 7 leaving you with the saying, it's not yours, not mine, but ours. Save Mother Earth. In this slide are the references we have utilized for our report. Thank you for listening and enjoy your day.